Welcome, folks, to Last Week I Learned. This is Jimmy Cerrone, and today we have a special guest. My coworker, Andy Peterson, is here to talk about web performance. I did this deep dive, and I was like, well, kind of want to dig more in, and I've been doing it just informally, but I was like, why not record it? So here we are. Andy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and why, I guess, you're interested in web performance?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, I've been, listening to you kind of talk about this web performance stuff has got me like renewed interest in it as well. Um, but yeah, I work a lot on ad tech side of software. I'm doing a lot of keeping an eye out of how pages can perform under heavy loads when it comes to ad tech, and as well as a lot of other things that make websites run. So, um, this has been sort of like a renewed focus over the past couple months for me, especially to kind of go deep dive into this sort of stuff and what makes the internet tick, what makes good experiences happen on the web, because how JavaScript is running. So, yeah, excited to talk about this.
No, and it's been kind of interesting. I think I've talked a lot with you about kind of my journey with web development. You know, we both kind of started as consultants working on these big kind of corporate web apps. I think that was one period. And then I tried self-hosting my blog. I know we talked a lot about this. And so it was just plain HTML, and that was lightning fast, even though it was running on a terrible server. But then there's ad tech, which we're in as well. And these are all very different. But what I want to talk about, and I'm curious about, is if you were building something like Instacart, you know, let's say like a single page application with, well, I guess that's one way of going about it. But if you had to build something really interactive that used JavaScript, what would you do from a web performance perspective? I know this is a little bit outside of the work you've been doing.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
No, but I've been kind of like going through, like, since I'm working on, I'd say, like, more traditional web technologies as of late, it gets me thinking about, like, what would I do back if I went back into, like, building these desktop grade applications in the web, doing a lot more stuff with, like, single page. And the worst answer I can give is, like, I would just do less. So, like, I think, like, the hyper interactivity is good up to a point, and maybe that's just because I really haven't had to deal with something like with Instacart, where I think of Instacart as like I really want it as lightweight as possible. Like, obviously, I'm not like navigating between a bunch of pages. I'm doing a lot of things on a single page. But really limiting the experience of the number of things I can possibly do on that application would be what I want, because that's where I've seen performance really just kind of go off the rails, is like a single web page trying to do too many things. Because there's a lot of levers you can pull when it comes to web performance. There's make you like your code, like, I think I always jump to like make the code really efficient, like solve problems with more efficient algorithms, like use less code in order to do things. But really, I think like one of the stronger levers to pull is just actually have the application be less capable and do less things on a particular page, which tends to make this, I guess, for someone like me, who really struggles to at times understand quickly how to work a particular piece of application, just have it do less. Because not only just does it run faster, but it's a nicer experience overall for someone coming in, especially for something I think of like Instacart. Like, I was trying to order pizza for for my kids using the little Caesars app the other day, and there was just so many different options. I try to use their little like web interface to like drag and drop ingredients onto a pizza, and it was slow. It wasn't always updating, going back and forth. There was so much stuff just to order a pizza that's like, this is ridiculous. And I know they probably spent a ton of money on that, but just I could like swipe back to like the original view of like a simple little checklist to be able to do those to order the right pizza rather than like drag and drop ingredients. Like, so to answer your question, I just would make highly interactive apps if I wanted to be performant. That's a terrible answer, but I think it's the right one at the moment.
Well, your example of the pizza reminds me of one of the bright spots I've seen here. Is there's this bookstore called, I can never pronounce it, All Libris, A-L, like A and then Libris. And their website looks like it's from like 1999. And it is the simplest thing. It has like a search bar, and you can like add something to your cart and you check out. And that is all. And you can log in, you have an account, and you can like do 5 things. And that is probably super performant now that I'm thinking about it, probably compared to Amazon, which is funny because that's Amazon is one of the folks that got me thinking about this. They found that 100 millisecond improvement in like page speed was 1% of sales. I could see a bump. And Pinterest had a similar experience. But yeah, and I think there's a trade-off too when it comes to like funnels. In terms of sales funnel, like I bet ideally you keep people on one page and you like sit them there. In terms of like every subsequent page, you're going to see people drop out of the funnel. But for performance, you probably want things spread out a little bit. I don't know. Those are weird trade-offs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's where it's like I want kind of more experience with those sort of like sales funnel, like at some point in my career to really see, because I feel like I've been on usually always focusing on enterprise software where that sort of 100 milliseconds doesn't matter. Maybe it's just simply from a development cost perspective, we could always take more trade-off with like having things load longer, where it was more like from a performance perspective, it was more important to show that something was doing work in the background. And then later you could always go back and speed things up, but it was more important, like you could have a little bit like, I don't know, sloppier interfaces as opposed to like some actual like external product that people have to get through. And watching like the masses at scale try to navigate a website is something that I'm getting more into, but
yeah. And for example, I remember, and this kind of gets into another point that I think you've made, which is what web performance can mean a lot of things. And this is kind of tangential, but I was working on a mobile app, and one of our goals was to keep the app size under, I think it was like 250 megabits, because above that, people would have to be on Wi-Fi to download it. And you would see a huge drop off in downloads if you went over this little marker. And so I think that's another point, is web performance is more than just speed. And even speed can be divided up into lots of things. That's one of the things you taught me, is like interaction time. First time to interaction is different than the largest contentful paint, which is different than the cumulative layout shift. You know, there's all these parts to it.
yeah. Like I mentioned before, it's like I always, when I thought of performance early on in my career, I always thought towards can I write optimized pieces of code, but now I'm shifting towards like there's like a set amount of work that has to be done on a page, and it's really about not increasing the efficiency of the code, but like increasing the efficiency of when that work is happening on the processor itself. I think in the web world where you're running, like just a simplified view of the web world is you're running on a single thread of the browser. That can act, that's a little bit more complicated but like mainly there's just a single thread that is painting the screen and doing most of your processing of whatever JavaScript code you're running, and being able to take a more careful view about like when things are running and like what sort of work can you delay for a couple 100 milliseconds, maybe even seconds down the line, just to give the user enough time to do those first couple interactions that are so key to making a good impression on the product.
Well, I think it's such a different way of programming, and it's so different than what I was taught, you know, in school. In school, it was like all data structure and algorithms, which it's just very different. It was like, how do you write an efficient bubble sort? You know, how do you sort things well? And it's the real life performance stuff is not really about that.
Yeah, like there's a piece to it. I feel like that's like like the first step is always to kind of break down what sort of work you have to do and prioritizing that work on a thread that you're working on efficiently. And then you kind of go into, well, can I make those chunks of work smaller? Which maybe I'll get really into in a couple of months here once I try to crack the current problem I'm dealing with in my work in terms of prioritizing the work that needs to be done.
When I think the more I've gotten into this, I remember when I was just out of school, I was so annoyed with Google and Amazon's interview process, because I was like, why is it so data structures and algorithms heavy? Like, we never use this. And I feel like, yeah, when we were like cranking out web apps as consultants, like, no, we didn't think about this. But now, like, when you're at a company that's doing a specific thing, it really does start to matter, you know? So I've been surprised by that. But one thing I'm curious about is the tooling for this seems pretty atrocious. why do you think the tooling for measuring performance is so bad and for improving performance as well? I mean, both of them don't seem very well developed to me.
Question. For me, it's like I always go between like, is it not developed or is it just tooling that is complicated enough where I don't quite understand it myself? I feel like I'm still pretty new to this performance thing. Um, but I think it's just it is niche. Like the amount, like how to squeeze out, like when do you need to squeeze out performance in a particular web application? I feel like maybe like being an ad tech, we're in a world where that is a lot more important. So we're starting to see kind of those rough edges in the tooling. So that's where it's like my guess is just because it's not that popular, but maybe I'm naive. Like I'm trying to say it's not popular just because there's probably people outside my bubble that really I never had to think about it until I was in this bubble of dealing with web applications at scale.
I don't think it's that popular. I remember reading the folks at 37 Signals. They were talking about how heavy React was, how much JavaScript they were sending across the wire. And I was like, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. What are they? They're weirdos. Like, why are they into this? And I think what they do with Hotwire and stuff, which is one of their like web frameworks, is pretty niche. Like I got the sense, I mean, they use it in Ruby on Rails, but I don't think people even know. Like, I don't think that many people understand like what Ruby on Rails is doing behind the scenes to reduce JavaScript, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing I'm learning too, is like how much does happen behind the scenes that makes it so most people don't have to worry. Because what I'm noticing right now with performance too is you really only get to a spot where you get like return on investment in performance if you have an established product, like a solution that you know how to do, and you go to the optimization. But what I'm finding is like as I try to optimize a code base that has solved the problem, like it takes a different way of thinking about that problem. So like getting to that solution first, which I think is what most companies will try to do, especially like when I was doing consulting. You would always try to get to the solution, find the right solution, and then once you can sit on that right solution for all, then you can go perform. So like the people at 37 Signals and like I don't know, develop like the Rails ecosystem over there, you kind of have that problem solved. You can go and start trying to make those little optimizations along the way.
That's true.
So optimization makes software incredibly difficult to change once you get to that point. So
yeah, you get stuck. And I remember, I think this was an article you sent me a long time ago where it's like software practices only matter insofar as they improve the business. Like you could have crappy software that makes a ton of money and it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter. It's a cash cow. Like who cares how bad it is? Like to some degree. And I think also the incentive, like you said, is to like land the plane. Like who cares if you have like an Instacart competitor that's written in Rust and it's super fast? If you have no customers, like you're screwed. Like it doesn't matter.
Performance is like, and that's what as a craft, I love looking at performance, but it's just not a viable business model to focus on performance. Like as I was looking for ways to do like monitoring of like the event loop in JavaScript, like trying to look for tooling to make my life easier, as I started diving into the stuff, there's just not even like tooling out there.
No,
I mean there is some, but like not like for like specific like figuring out metadata about the event loop. It's just there's not it's weirdly such a niche thing for something that's so like fundamental that most people just don't have to care about. It's just it doesn't. That's not what drives customers to a product. So
other languages, like do you think like embedded or something that needs to be super power efficient? Or I'm trying to think of languages or frameworks or applications that would care a ton about performance if maybe they have better tooling.
Yeah,
like, I don't think this exists for Python either. Like I've never seen a profiler for Python. Now I don't write much Python, but
yeah, I'm sure there is ways, but that's the whole point of like scripting languages is like you're building something to make it easier to develop it. And the optimizations happen when that gets like compiled into the machine code. Something like I don't know. I peeked under the hood recently just to try to understand what my JavaScript's actually doing to see like what levers we can pull down at like the V8 engine level, and it's crazy. And they're already doing like anything under the sun that I could think of as someone naive going into that.
Well,
All this is doing
yeah.
for me is like I should dive in. Now I kind of want to dive into other domains. It's not web. Get out of my JavaScript bubble and see what else people care about.
Well, I think one of the promising things here is like using constrained devices where performance does matter. Like, so I think, on the web, if you're using like a really old Android with terrible Wi-Fi, that like that'll teach you. Or I was messing around with the Raspberry Pi, and it's like, okay, if I try to run some Rust code on there, like it's gonna be a hell of a lot slower.
Mm-hmm.
On a 0.5 gigahertz processor
Yeah.
than it is my like Mac, God knows what it is, 3.2, whatever.
And maybe that's honestly where I've seen a lot of the main benefits that I think across the board that products I've worked on have gotten from performance measurement is like constraining device. Like you can find a lot of interesting behaviors with whatever software you have by just like reducing the amount of resources you have to compute. That it just really drives out the edge cases, and like so taking an eye on performance and like being diligent about measuring it, you can and you do often just end up building better products, not necessarily more performant products, because you can see new and interesting different behaviors. But
Yeah, I think an interesting area here that I'm actually my next deep dive is going to be about like household robots, but just IoT in general. I think is really interesting when it comes to like performance. If you think about like a fridge, I doubt that thing has a crazy processor, and you're probably writing in like C, or Rust at best. Like that's probably where you start to get into interesting performance stuff.
yeah, good point, because I feel like that's why I can't really stand my IoT devices, anything I do have, because it does take so long for the things to boot up. It's really just waiting for like a signal to get to the robot. Like I got a robot vacuum that crawls around, but I hate using it just because it's such a pain to like interact with through a phone and maybe the app. But yeah, like even like smart fridges, they don't strike me as the type that really compared to the things I have to do on the web, which like I need to be able to react within like 50 milliseconds to like a click. I feel like like anything I've seen like out of this like smart fridge takes like seconds to do. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd be really curious to profile like, well, like what are those like what possible resources are on a fridge? Like what else is taking up all that compute power to like not have me like mash a button to try to figure out? I don't even know what a smart fridge does, so I'm just kind of making stuff up here. But
I don't either, and that's where it gets into like Wi-Fi. That I think the tough part about web performance is just how little control you have, as well. Like, let's say you're developing for like a Nintendo Switch game with no online component. You control most of that experience, But like when it comes to the web, it's the Wild West. Like they could be on a freaking boat and using the ship's Wi-Fi and God knows on a terrible device. And there's no way you're going to make the performance good, which is the interesting part of the problem, which I guess I'll end on this and we can wrap up here is I remember there was this big push to web apps, everything. Like apps are going away. I remember because I was doing this for a while where I would like, instead of downloading the App Store app, I would go to the website and I would create a pin on my phone. I did this for Linear, that project management app. I didn't download the Linear app. I went to linear.app, online and pinned it to my homepage. Do you still think web apps are ascendant? I kind of get this sense that's kind of gone away. I don't really know why, but
yeah, I mean, I'm gonna kind of going back to like I think our original topic. I think web apps are still the future simply because I feel like the future is not highly interactable apps. So that might be just like a really bad take there. But I like using products that are simple, single purpose, and not doing a whole lot. And I don't know. I don't like installing like one-off apps for those sorts of things. I'd rather like visit a.
Ooh.
Yeah, I feel like the web apps is such a nice, and I'm biased here as a developer. It's such a nice experience as a developer to be able to deploy right to your users directly, rather than have to go through the a marketplace, a store and a review process. That thing. I think the Wild West of the web is the Wild West of the web is going to be the spot in order to like it's a great developer experience to be able to throw stuff out there and get it directly to your users at low cost. So
Yeah, and I like your point with single purpose. I find myself more and more I'm very single purpose. Like I've been test driving this app called Amy, which is like a calendar and a to do and a note taking and AI, and I don't like it. I have a note taking app. I use Todoist, and then I have a calendar, and I like that setup more than all in one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I probably can't speak to it. I don't build products by myself to sell them. So my ideas of what makes a good product are probably invalid, but I do know what I do. I do know what I like. And I'm with you. It's like connect everything into a single app. That's probably going to be the downfall of X here pretty soon, the everything app, once it does try to do way too much. Besides just give me spicy developer takes from random people online, like it's gonna be over. So
I know it'll be interesting. I might do a deep dive on the Fediverse at some point, and I might pull you back into that one for developers' take on that. All right, well, Andy, thank you so much for joining. This was a blast, and folks, if you have any questions or things we should look into when it comes to web performance, let us know in the comments.
thanks, Jimmy.
All right, take care.